Hello, everyone. Thank you, Cameron, for the introduction. So, as mentioned, I'm here today to do a teaching segment to demonstrate GitHub for academic research. So, Cameron already explained some of the basics of Git and GitHub, along with the advantages it may have compared to other types of file sharing, such as Google Drive. So, there's no more, final paper last version 2.0. So in this example, we're going to be covering a student and an advisor, and it will be covering a research project that is exploring the phenotype variations of the common fruit fly. So by phenotype variations, we're talking about external appearances such as bigger wings or longer antennae or larger eyes, and if and what environmental factors affect the changes in these fruit flies. So if we were on Google Docs, we could just have, the article over here. It seems pretty straightforward, and we have our familiar commenting feature. However, once we get into the other parts of the research, such as the code and the analysis, as you can see, the code is not formatted that well, and it's kind of difficult to track the changes. Whereas in GitHub, it will show the Jupyter Notebook, the cells much better. And we also have a commenting feature as well. And so that is why it's worthwhile to have all of our files, including some of the licenses and the README that Cam already went through. And again, we could have a conversation on GitHub as well. So if you are already familiar with Git and GitHub, then you might be familiar with all these different commands of like staging, working directory, remote, forking. And it is very powerful that way. However, this, I would say, is the most, full extent of Git that is really good for a software development workflow where you could have 6 people and 6 branches, and you have the feature, you have the bug fix, release. Very powerful, but also can be very overwhelming. So learning curve to that. Therefore, we have prepared today a simplified Git workflow that focuses on just 2 people, the student and the advisor. We're not going to be using a terminal nor any command line interface, just the GitHub website. And we're also going to be sticking to one branch for simplicity. So I am now going to move over to the GitHub repository, and that will get us a closer view as to what we're working with. So give me one moment as we make this switch. Okay, so we are now at GitHub, and as you can see, we have the repository right over here. We have a bunch of files, and if you're not familiar, if this is your first time looking at this repository, it'd be kind of overwhelming. Which one do I click on first? Thankfully, we have the handy dandy README that will explain some of the information here. I also want to mention for context and for credit, all of this material is actually based off the work of Rowan Crockett over here. He has a really good example of what it means to do scientific research, and it kind of goes into more depth of some of the other ways you could set things up, like your environment. But again, for our context, we'll keep it simple. So, as mentioned earlier, phenotypic variations of the fruit fly, also known as the Drosophila, and the influence of environmental factors on that, and collecting sample, the traits, and statistical analysis. There's also a handy guide that explains some of the files, such as license, README, a really important one, the Jupyter Notebook with the student's statistical analysis, the article, a summary of their findings, some of their raw data, along with a bibliography citing the open source software used. So let's check out the few key documents. Let's check out the raw data first. So over here, we see a CSV file. So again, this is a very simplified example, but it provides some of the context. Okay, the student has collected things in 3 different environments, a cafeteria, biology lab, green spaces, and the 2 traits that we're observing. So we know that this is the data. Let's look at the analysis that was done to the data. So we could skip back here, come to the analysis, and come to our Jupyter Notebook. As you can see, it talks about the context specifically of, the code, what libraries you use, open source, how we loaded the data, how we did the plotting, along with the code right over here. And again, formatted nicely, perfectly, just as we want it to. We can also see the plot right over here and an explanation of some of the statistical analysis the student used, the chi-square test, and why it's relevant in the study over here. So we have covered the data and the analysis. Now I'm also going to look at the student's article, their summary of their findings. And if you look over here, it quite similar to, say, like a published paper. You have the title, you have the abstract, you have the acknowledgments. It goes through in a much broader view of the research that we're looking at. So it doesn't just say these are the numbers. It kind of talks about where and why this is relevant, what work is this already drawing upon. Researchers built upon those before us, along with a lot of other contexts, materials, methods, sample collection, data analysis. This was in a Jupyter notebook, along with all the results and the information all over here. And so there we go. We have all the relevant information in the files right here on GitHub. However, this is still a work in progress. As we mentioned earlier, the student's work is going to be looked over by the advisor. And the advisor is going to look at this with a bit more of a critical eye to review and comment and help the student finish up their work. So, if I switch to my advisor mindset, there is something I've already noticed here that needs a correction. But much like in Google Docs, I can't directly, type into the student's work and said, oh, you did this wrong, or this is actually like that. Instead, we're going to go through a comment and a review process. So I'm going to show an overview of that back in my slides before we jump back into the GitHub website. So if I go over here and I go check out my slides, we are going to, so we have the student's work right over here. We have the student and the advisor. The advisor is going to make a fork or a copy of this repository. The advisor is then going to change a file inside of it, make a pull request, and then the student will take a look at those changes and accept them. And once those are accepted, update the files. So that is the simplified workflow that we are going to be using today. And so with that, I am now going to go back to GitHub so we can see this in action. So we have here the student's repository, and this is on the student's account. So I'm going to switch over to the advisor's account, which I have prepared right over here. So as you can see, I am now in Advisor Drosophila, and I have open student's work, and I want to make the changes. I want to make a comment. The first part I'm going to start with is with making a fork. So we're going to come right over here to this button. We are going to, there's all these settings. We're just going to keep all these settings here, create the fork. Creating the fork, then a few seconds. And now we have the fork. So I am going to actually show you all where exactly, as with my advisor Eagle Eyes, the mistake that I've noticed in the student's work. So if I scroll down in the article, I noticed that here it says the environment it was collected was in the chemistry lab, but I remember and actually can cross-reference that this is actually collected in the biology lab. So I want to help the student correct this over here. So one way I could do that is by making an edit. So this file, this is a fork, so it's my copy, not directly the student's copy, but we can go ahead and edit it over here. For those who have used Visual Studio Code, RStudio, any of these type of like different interfaces to use to change code, this is pretty basic and antiquated, but for our context, it's perfectly works perfectly well, and it lets us stay in the GitHub website. So this it will be enough for a simple change we have here. So if we scroll down, and scroll down, we will come across here. The environment is not the chemistry laboratory, but the biology laboratory. We're going to go ahead and make that change, and we are going to commit that change. There is a commit message here. We're going to go through that in a bit more detail later. But as of right now, I'm going to commit that. And so if we scroll down, you will see, okay, change, biology lab. But as I mentioned earlier, this is only a fork. This has not gone to the student side. How do we let the student know that we've made this change? We are going to now make a pull request. So with a pull request, that means going back. So let's go back. Let's look at the student's original work right over here. And let's now go make a pull request. So we can make a new pull request right over here. And the pull request will be comparing the original student's research project to ours. So we are looking at the changes over here. So in these branches, oh yeah, these are the branches over here. So we are, as I mentioned, going to be making a pull request so we could make this requested change show up in the students' files. So we have here the change. So we have the advisors comparing it to the students, and you can see we have a change right over here, chemistry to biology. So when we make the pull request, we could see how this is all going to play out. So when we make a pull request, it suggested you add a title and add a description. So we're going to make a very simple title, update article markdown file to biology lab. And we could say right over here that, let's see, I noticed an error in where the sample was collected. And so we can now make a pull request. And now we have the pull request, and then we could see the conflicts and the commits. You can see some of the changes over here. So in that case, we could see that, and we could switch over to the student side so we could better see what's going on over there. So I am now going to switch over. And we can see that there is an update here. There is a pull request made by the advisor. So if we click on that, we can see there is a change. Notice an error. Let's take a look at that. And we can see the old version had chemistry lab, and then this version says biology lab. And so now we can have a, comment. We can do it back and forth. So an example was that, oh, this, did I get the lab wrong? You could add a comment over there. And then if we switch to the advisor's point of view on their account, we could see a comment. And now you could say, yes, the lab was the biology lab. And now you could have this back and forth that looks more familiar, something you might have seen on Google Docs. And so on the student side, we could finally see that change and say, oh, okay, my bad. I was in both labs that day. I will make this update. And that way we have the conversation out in the open so that if any other advisors or professors or students wanted to see this work, they could see it right here. So in this case, the student says, yes, I agree. Let's take these changes, make them final. So in this case, we are going to press the merge button. Here we see again the commit message. So in this case, we are going to write a descriptive commit message that summarizes the change. In this case, it's a very simple change. So we are going to say update chemistry lab to biology lab. We are going to confirm, and now the merge has been made. So if I go back to the code, I can see a very recent update, and we could check out the update over here. And if we scroll down, it is updated to biology lab. You can also see this change happen because of in this commit here. So we have the specific change if we want to see over there. It's easier to track when and how this changed. And we can see, oh, it was a couple minutes ago. And we know that's a different change that happened 3 days ago or different from what happened 4 months ago. So that's a really easy overview to track the changes across multiple files and have less chance of final document last one 2.0. And so that is also a simplification of uh, the whole contribution workflow. In this case, because there's only two people, we didn't really have the same things that Cameron mentioned, such as raising an issue first and having a conversation. And then after a certain point, you might make a pull request, another conversation, and then maybe it gets to merge. In this case, we can assume that the student and the advisor were meeting in person, they were emailing, they were on the same page, that when I look at your repository, it's going to be mostly small changes, looking at your code, things like that. So before I end my segment, I want to go back to our slides and talk a bit more like why was this relevant? Like there's all this clicking back and forth, and you could actually see there was a moment where I mixed things up, but this is all really worthwhile because if we move back to our slides over here, we did this whole process and we had the fork. But the question is, why should I learn Git? Why should I learn GitHub? Why should I learn another thing? And we had a really great conversation earlier in our training, like academia is already so competitive and we're overworked. This is like a nice to have or but not a must have, or there's also the fear of like, being scooped up. Why should I learn another thing on top of that? For a lot of us, we came into researching this because it's our passion, and this is a place that we could share our passion and study it more and do that. We didn't necessarily come here to code, but we are here to learn open science, and one really useful tool to open science is Git and GitHub. And so learning Git is worthwhile because it gives you credit for your code, your work in the same way for your articles. It's visibility of your research work beyond, the few academic journals of publish and perish. And you're doing your part to help solve the scientific reproducibility crisis. And it continues to pay dividends because it also lets you learn a new skill set. So what we saw in GitHub was just one repository focused on research. But now that you have a GitHub account, you can make more repositories and you can make other things. And then you could learn a code tutorial and then you can make like a mini snake game and then you can make your own website. And the next thing you know, you could be learning a new skill set. And so if you are someone who's interested in like, building your skill sets that could be useful beyond academia, or you're interested in looking to industry, Git is a really good starting point to learn software development, code, and wherever that leads to you in the future. And so thank you very much for attending my teaching segment. You are all welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. And yes, again, thank you so much. I'm Mars Lee. I look forward to hearing from you all. And I will now hand the time back to Cameron to close our open science training.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mars. That was a fantastic demonstration of what a real-world GitHub workflow or collaborative workflow looks like.